live. Wow. Okay, I have to behave. Good evening, everybody. My name is Funmi Iyanda. What an absolute pleasure it is to be here with you, at home with you. I'm not going to say it. Everybody said to say invade your home and invade your hearts. But I must say that I'm really grateful that all these years after 10 years since I've been on TV and 12 years since New Dawn, that I still get so much love. Thank you very much. And thank you for letting me into your home, particularly at a time like this when I don't have the words for what has happened. I just hope to find the words for going on. Today's show is going to be very quick. I'm used to television, so I'm going to learn this as we go along. And yes, this show eventually will also transform into a TV show, so don't worry about that. Today's guest, I have an announcement to make to start with. First, I'm going to say Ramadan Kareem to all my Muslim brothers and sisters who have started the month, the holy month now. So, my first guest today cannot make it anymore. The thing with running an agency such as the NCDC is that you are urgently on call all the time. So Dr. Chikwe was called into a meeting of the presidential committee and is still trying to get out. I don't know if he's going to be able to join us, but the information I have right now is that he's in the meeting and might not be able to join us on time. However, my two other guests are here. Hafsat Abiola-Costello is an old friend of mine, and she's the executive president of Women in Africa, but that's not all. I mean, her resume is incredibly impressive. What I like about Hafsat's resume is she's gone from public to development to government and then back to development. So she has a rounded world view of what it takes to go from an idea of the self to the idea of a society.
Okay. You're in Brussels, aren't you, with the family? So I'm going to start and ask you what it's like on ground there.
You know, here we have a competent government, hyper-competent. And, but it doesn't mean that there are not challenges. You know, we've already lost 5,000 people and we've been in lockdown for 6 weeks. Over 5,000 people have died. You know, opposite our home here is an old people's home. And every day the ambulance is coming to take away bodies. Every day.
You know,
this disease is serious.
I cannot use the word glad, but it's important that you say that because we haven't seen, except for the unfortunate death of the chief of staff, Malam Abakari, and may his soul rest in peace. Except for that, there hasn't been a lot of, and please God, no, there has been a lot of visibility of mortality. So there's also denial because of that. I want to go back to China with you because, you know, my first interest in China was you. I mean, years ago, almost over 10 years ago, you were the one who said to me, something special is happening in China and we should be learning from China and we should be working with China. But apparently China lied.
Oh, do you
think so? Well, that's the story, isn't it? That China lied. That China did not tell the world on time. And China did not give the world enough information. And so somewhat China is somewhat partially responsible for where we are at. In fact, there's been calls for China in particular regarding Africa to cancel or reschedule the dates because Africa will take a big hit if it goes bad. What says you?
I think that this coronavirus is unprecedented. I mean, the speed at which it infects, it has never been seen before. And I think that we have to give every country, especially the first country to encounter it, the benefit of the of learning about the disease. Because you can imagine that you hear about something. The country is 1.4 billion people, and the disease attacks one place in China. Now, it's not the political capital, it's not Beijing, where the leadership is. It's a major city, and you have to give them time to even understand what is happening. First, they needed to understand that it has moved from animals, something that is with animals, it has moved to human beings, and that it's moving from not just animals to humans, but from humans to human transmission. And that, the problem with this disease is that if you even delay 3 weeks in understanding that, you can imagine then that you already have a crisis of incredible proportions on your hands. And that's what happened in China. The first known case, they say, is end of November. So if you give them even 3 weeks from the first known case to understanding how it's transmitting and understanding that it's transmitting that quickly, then they were already communicating by towards the end of December about this.
I'm going to ask you.
They didn't do so badly in the country.
In China. I'm going to come back to China. There's a comment here from, I think is, oh gosh, why do you guys spell your names like this? I can't. Ogago Hizi. Oh my goodness, it's Yoruba that the person is spoken with a lot of H. Ogago Hizi, I love it. Ogago Hizi says almost 60,000 in the USA. You've also lived in the USA. You have, you and I have spoken a lot of time about America, and there's a situation with China struggling to understand this, knowing what to do, and then America, what's going on with America?
Well, I mean, first of all, we're talking about America that knew about the disease definitively by the end of January, right? And was still struggling when their first cases were coming in March. We're still struggling to know how to handle it. And yet we cannot give China the benefit to understand that it could take them at least 3 weeks to grapple with this thing. Do you understand where there's a dichotomy in our thinking? If a country saw it coming, saw China lock down Wuhan, Wuhan has 60 million people. They brought Wuhan into complete lockdown. We saw videos of them nailing people into their houses so that they're not spreading the disease. And doing all of this, yeah, somebody is saying on the time that they needed to inform WHO immediately. Well, they did inform the WHO, but they did not know that the disease was moving from human to human transmission.
Yeah.
And I think that even till today, the nature of the disease is not well known, even till now.
There's a lot of learning going on. The other thing people are not happy with China in Africa about is the videos they've seen of the way Black people and Nigerians in particular are being treated in China.
I think that a lot of misunderstanding in the way they're trying to contain this disease is affecting Africans. So what happened in Guangzhou, some of those videos I should explain, that in Guangzhou, there was a Chinese woman that owned a restaurant. She's married to an African. And people that used to come to that restaurant were Africans. The woman now was tested and she had COVID-19. She tested positive. So they now needed to trace all the people that use our restaurant. And the request was that they should go and be tested. The Africans that use that restaurant should go and be tested so that they know that they're not infected. Because once they're infected, they need to be contained. They need to be quarantined. But for many of the Africans, some of them there, they're not there with the right papers. And here is something I think the Chinese have to take care of. Because, you see, the Chinese have such rigid rules about the validity of stay. Sometimes they can give you 1 year validity, 2 year validity, and that's affecting some of the Africans that are living there. So some of them become out of, they're not within the legal, they don't have the legal right to be there. Now, once they don't have the legal right, they now cannot go to the hospital to be tested. And if they're tested, they will get the certificate that says you are free to walk around. But if you can't go and be tested, you cannot stay in your hotel. You cannot, the landlord cannot continue to rent to you because the landlord will be held responsible. And you cannot stay in any hotel but one hotel, because then they designate one hotel for people who are not tested, where if they enter that hotel, they're essentially in quarantine for 2 weeks.
My question is, with the video I saw, there was a non-African woman, a non-Black woman, a white woman who was waved in. I mean, there's a lot of questions to ask regarding testing, because I know, for example, that Ireland tested almost all their population, and half of the population is asymptomatic. So we don't even know who has it and who doesn't have it. So I asked myself, could there have been a chance that even before the index case, because we do trade with China, there might have been cases that were unknown or undiagnosed? And if that was the case, we did not behave in the way China had behaved. We did not say, let's grab all the Chinese, along with Nigerians who come in from China. We didn't do that.
And the Chinese actually are not testing all the Africans. They're testing people that are in designated areas that are potential to be infected. You can imagine how many Africans are in China. Every year, the Chinese give 50,000 scholarships to Africans, every year. So you can imagine the sheer number of Africans in China. You're not seeing 50,000 people on social media saying that they're being discriminated against. You're not seeing that. You're seeing like maybe maximum 24, max. So I think that we need to be mindful that they have very rigid rules, and it's going to affect, and right now, even they are panicked and they're trying to contain a problem. I don't know if you've seen the videos of how they check everyone coming into China now. Yeah. Everyone coming in, it's like trying to go into Mars.
I mean, it's important for me at this point in conversation to make the comparison between China, what China is doing, not just to Africans, but to everybody in terms of curtailing the pandemic, and compare it with what's happening in Europe, so that we can then bring it home to what's going on here and what might need to happen. Because of course, there's a big fear that Nigeria's jump is still in the future. That is a big fear.
Yes.
How would you rate the treatment? What's going on in China? I mean, some of the things China is doing is, frankly, can be considered draconian and would not maybe work in Europe.
Quite draconian. Yeah. I mean, don't you think it was crazy when they were nailing people to the houses so that they wouldn't come out? It seems so crazy. But the truth is that this disease jumps. It leaps. It moves so quickly. It's so highly infectious. So you have to really be quite tough about stamping it out, and if you're going to go that route, you can go the route of Sweden, where they just are not maintaining lockdown. They're not putting people under lockdown. People are free. Restaurants are open. Pubs are open. You could do that. But then the disease will just spread and you would get herd immunity. Because you see, I've been reading about in Africa that can we afford lockdown? I don't know if we can afford tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people dying all around us. It will cause panic.
That is a big big conversation going on. I've spoken to a lot of people, and some in positions of authority, and the feedback I can give is there's a resentment, from the streets to people in authority. So it's not just people in authority. The feedback I've got is there's a seething resentment of the lockdown, as though it's not that necessary. And that's why you're not in Lagos, I'm in Lagos. So there's a lot of flexibility. People are getting around. You can see the results already, because in Lagos,
several people on your timeline have been saying that what is happening in Sweden is backfiring, and they are right. People are dying in Sweden. You saw what happened in Italy. Italy was pretty much, not really abiding by lockdown. Look at how Italy got overwhelmed.
So, Hafsat, are you saying that Nigeria? Are you saying that Nigeria would have to adopt stiffer, tougher means of curtailing it? And do we have the resources? Because the argument people are making is between hunger and death.
For me, let us find the resources. This is an opportunity for Nigeria to actually just start taking care of a lot of our people in the informal economy, our working poor and our poor. Let's find the resources and just help them to manage this thing. We do not have what it takes to manage a crisis. We have about 1.1 bed per 1,000 or so for critical care across the continent. We have the lowest ratio of critical hospital beds per population in the world. Italy was ranked in the top 10 of medical systems, global medical systems, in the top 10. You saw the crisis. You saw the Chinese bringing doctors. We have 450 ventilators in a country of 200 million. Let us find these resources wherever we can find them. Because you see, our people complain. You can't imagine the kind of complaint if this situation goes out of control. And we will not be able to count on anyone but ourselves. We have to find the money. We've done it through when we did the MDGs, we used to send money, and even the SDGs now, they send food to schools. Let us find ways to get food to poor communities in a consistent, systematic way, making sure that no one is left out. Let us find a way to institute welfare for people. We need to do that because we don't have the hospitals.
And when you said earlier that we have to find the resources, my mind also was thinking that resource includes human responsibility, taking responsibility for one another and for ourselves, which we are not very good at. Hafsat, I could talk to you all day. We want to make this snappy. I obviously will have to bring you back some other time. In fact, already people are saying to me that you can't do this weekly, you must do more. We'll talk about how we get on with that, because I wanted to also talk to you about what happens to women in situations like this. But
and you know, we can bring people, we can connect directly to people in China working on the discrimination law, because they're working on a discrimination law that will have penalties for Chinese who are discriminating. We can bring them on because they're doing a lot of research now about what's going on. The final thing I want to say about the Chinese and Africa, and you mentioned debt. You know, I spoke to friends in the Africa Development Bank, and they were telling me that there was a time Ethiopia needed to renegotiate their debt with China. And then there was a time Guinea needed to renegotiate their debt with China. That the Chinese were always amenable. I think in the case of Guinea, they canceled, and in the case of Ethiopia, they canceled 80–90%. I think that with the Chinese, the problem is not the debt cancellation of the cancellation of existing debt, because I think that the Chinese, if the African countries engage them, will want to help because they don't want the African economies collapsing. But I think that it's important that we engage them as a partner, not as, oh, we're going to just cancel the debt, because the issue is not past debt, it's future credit that's the issue. You can cancel past debt because you have the power. You can decide, I'm not going to pay. Then what will happen when you need critical resources and to import from China or from some other places? And a lot of the production globally has been done in China. So some of it will have to be from China. I think we always have to maintain the relationship. And the relationship that these people have offered to Africa, yes, I mean, we can be critical of it, but I'd like us to be critical of it while we consider what else anybody else is putting on the table.
Yeah.
What else are others putting on the table? And this is where I challenge my European and American friends and people that I encounter. Like I was just in Berlin presenting to the German government. And I said, you know, don't talk to Africans about China, because they're always talking across the world. In the Western world, they're always talking about China and Africa. I said they should leave Africans to be responsible for our engagement with China, because that's why we're sovereign states in Africa. You talk to us about what you are going to put on the table to access what you want from Africa. And we'll negotiate with you, because we have no problem engaging with you as well. But you talk to us about what you put on the table. You go into a market and you see a seller. You don't start telling the seller, don't buy from Funmi.
Yeah.
She's this kind of person.
Just tell me what you want. Tell me what you're selling.
You tell us what you want to do. Yes.
You
So,
know,
yes,
we,
sorry, sis.
yeah,
Speak,
I know.
hon.
I mean, there's so much to talk about, and I'm back, so we're going to talk about all kinds of things. I know that you also have told me that we need you back,
We're so
so
happy
I
you're
am back.
back. We're so happy you're back because you're gangster, you're authentic, you're real, and you're principled. Your kind of voice is the voice we need because we're a great nation and a nation that is growing into greatness. And for that, we need the right information. We need power. We don't need sycophants and liars and all that. All that. When you feed yourself with garbage,
Yeah,
then you come
with
out with
garbage. I
garbage.
know.
We need to feed ourselves with people like you because your mind is sharp. So don't go anywhere anymore. We need you.
Promise.
And thank you for
Thank you.
coming
Girls
here.
got on a promise. Thank you, Hafsat. Thank you. I'm trying to get Dr. Kabir Umar on.
Hello.
Hello. How are
Good e
you?
Fine,
Good
thank you.
evening.
Good
Very, very
evening.
nice to meet you.
Same here. The pleasure is mine.
But Dr. Kabir, I want to go very quickly because we spent a lot of time earlier with lovely Hafsat Abiola-Costello, and I wanted to go quickly to begin to talk with you, particularly about security, because one of the big issues right now is what will happen with the lockdown. If the lockdown needs to be extended, what does that mean for Nigeria?
So there is a lot to talk about, and because our time is limited, I'll try to focus on a few areas. One of them is the transformation of policing itself. COVID-19 is new. Of course, as the name suggests, it's novel coronavirus. So we've never encountered the situation we're in. Virtually everybody is playing catch up, including the police themselves. They're playing catch up. So there's a transformation, and I'll talk about that. Then the second thing is the police has been asked to enforce a policy that affects the social contract between government and the citizens. Movement is a right. Now our movement has been stopped, and in this instance, it's affecting the economy. A woman who puts pure water on her head and goes out to sell that pure water feeds her family. In the north, you have people who put dates or kola nut. The capital for that is probably just 2,000 naira or 3,000 naira. They make a little profit from it and then feed their family with it. Now, the police have been asked to enforce that policy that affects that social contract. And whether we are talking about it or not, the legitimacy of their function is being discussed, psychologically, as it were. So that's one other area I would like to talk about. Then the third area is what I would call the psychology of security. We're all in a state of grief, in a traumatic state, in one form or the other. And there are about 5 stages of that grief, starting from anger to sometimes even bargaining, depending on what you are going through. So a husband, for instance, who is used to going out every day in the morning, all of a sudden he's at home. And, sometimes, unfortunately, that anger is, directed at his spouse or his kids. So you're seeing a rise in domestic violence and other sexual violence. How are we managing these 5 stages of grief? The security agencies that we've deployed to the streets, have they been taught on this psychology of security that I talked about? How do they approach somebody who is in this state of grief? Are they going to use the gun?
They also are in a state of trauma and grieving. What concerns me about the conversation is that we don't seem to be talking about what the alternative is if we don't find a way around this. Claire, you've spoken about traders. You've spoken about artisans. You've spoken about people who live from hand to mouth. This is the majority of Nigerians. Already around us, we can see some of the repercussions because people are getting hungry and angry. What do you think in the short term, given what the situation is and what we are dealing, what we have, what should be done? What can be done? What can we propose that will be different to handle on the short run? A potential breakdown, to prevent a potential breakdown in social fabric and security.
The most important thing is the efficiency of the palliative measure being given by government and the private individuals. I think it's called COVID, that the federal, the Central Bank of Nigeria is managing, and then of course some several private individuals that led by Dangote. Now, the efficiency, the effectiveness and the efficiency of that palliative measure will reduce a lot of this pressure on government. Because, of course, if you deny people from going out, they have to feed. And if you give them some form of palliative, it will help them in feeding. So that's number one. Number two, which I find more important because of the field I'm in, security, is there needs to be a template for what I would call a standard operating procedure for security management in COVID-19 or pandemic periods. We already have a policy. The government came up with a policy in December 2019, what they call the revised national security strategy. Unfortunately, they are not implementing it. A lot of man hours, resources was put into developing that document, and then the implementation has gone south, as it were, or it hasn't even started. So we can't talk about it going south. So that template needs to be developed quickly. And I must say that there are lots of security practitioners who are willing and happy to support the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 in developing that document, because it is their responsibility. Develop that document together with the relevant security agencies. Now, what is the importance of that document? It will do 2 or 3 basic things. Firstly, it will be the template that civil society organizations, media, and every Nigerian can assess the efficacy of the functions of the security agencies. If they are deviating from the set out goals, you can look at that document and say, well, this is not what you are asked to come and do in the public. I know a guideline has been developed by the PTF COVID-19, but a guideline is just a guideline. We need to bring it down to the level of the ordinary Nigerian, and it is in that standard operating procedure. The second part of the standard operating procedure is that it will protect the security operative himself. So he knows that if he's going out, he's supposed to be given PPEs, personal protective equipment. If it's not given, then at least he can look at it and say, well, you said you are going to give me, but you've not given me. The other part is that it would allow monitoring and evaluation, which is also very crucial. So at the end of this 2 weeks period, we would look back and say the responsibility given to the police or civil defense or correctional services, they've been able to meet that. So in direct answer to your question, for me, these are the 2 things: palliative, and then the development of a standard operating procedure that will guide the functions of the security agencies. All of this can be achieved in a very short time.
I mean, I see a lot of people commenting and agreeing with you as to what needs to be done in terms of just the structure. The question, because you answered it now, but then even in my mind, I'm thinking it sounds to me like building the ship and sailing it at the same time. And I don't know if that's possible. You say all of this is possible in 2 weeks. I do know that you are part of a think tank in the office of the, actually head the Security and Intelligence Committees in the office of the Senate President. So I'm hoping that you have reason to believe that this is possible and that there's a political will to do this. In the interim, people are forming vigilantes, across communities in Lagos, for example. I'm thinking, is there kind of like an intersection between a possible intersection between what the government is doing and what people can actually also support government to do, because these are unusual times. And I don't know if usual means would work.
Yes, that document I spoke about, the revised national security strategy, talked about community policing. And the answer to your question lies in that community policing. These self-help groups can be incorporated under community policing model. They need to know where their power starts and where it ends. So as an example, every citizen, every individual, every self-help group can effect arrest, but it cannot prosecute. So that is where the police and the civil defense corps and the other public security departments would need to do a lot of advocacy to these self-help groups, to Nigerians, because there is a vacuum, and these self-help groups are filling that vacuum. The only way for the police to stop rights abuse by this self-help group is to now teach them where their rights begin and where it ends. They can arrest, but they cannot prosecute.
I'm concerned about ISWAP, Boko Haram. I'm concerned about that. What is this an advantage in the war against them? This kind of situation, are they also trapped? Are they also not moving? Are they also not having access to resources and funding and food, which might allow the Nigerian army have kind of like an advantage over them? Or will this just worsen the situation?
So time will not allow me to go into the developments in the Northeast at the moment, but I'll quickly just give a summary. Starting from the campaign by Cameroon. Cameroon launched a campaign from the 31st of March to the 8th or 9th of April. They called it the Rat of Boma. Now, Boma is one of the provinces in Cameroon that on 23rd of March, ISWAP, or one of the factions of Jamaat al-Ahlisina al-Dawat wal-Jihad, that's Boko Haram, attacked and killed 100 soldiers, there about 100 Chadian soldiers. So out of anger, the Chadian president launched an attack against the groups that are operating, the terrorist groups that are operating in the Lake Chad region. And at the end of the campaign, he said he killed 1,000 of this, Boko Haram or ISWAP or soldiers, operatives. And then, of course, also called on the Nigerian and Nigerian government to come and take over their territories that he has liberated from the terrorists. And then, of course, the result of that, we saw the Chief of Army Staff, General Burutai, relocating to the Northeast. And then since then, we've seen several successful operations carried out by the Nigerian Army and the Nigerian Air Force. On the other hand, we've also seen several attacks by ISWAP as well as, Jamaat al-Ahlisina al-Dawat al-Jihad. Just yesterday, we monitored an attack along Maiduguri-Damaturu Road in the infamous location called Aunu. You recall a few months back, they attacked travelers that were affected, by the curfew, and several people were killed. Yesterday, too, the same thing happened. They carried on an attack, even though this time around, it was on a military formation. So ISWAP is still active. However, the Nigerian, as well as the multinational joint task force, is also carrying out several attacks against them. In terms of what COVID-19 and this particular period, Ramadan, means for the situation in the Lake Chad region, the Northeast, just this evening, I saw a video released by ISWAP. It was an ideological video where they traced through Islamic history, quote and unquote, wars or campaigns that have occurred during Ramadan period, trying to mobilize their members to tell them that you should not relax during the fasting period. This is the time for you to attack. So they are not laying back. They are mobilizing their members, and the attacks will continue.
Is this not enough reason to enforce lockdowns in states that may not have a high incidence of occurrence of the coronavirus yet, but where there is possibility of terrorism activity, just to actually lock down those states? Because there's somebody talking here, Najite, who said Lagos, for example, the lockdown is not working because she's a frontline worker and she goes around and she sees that the lockdown is not working. So if it's not working in Lagos, is there a case to be made that beyond the number of cases, another reason to lock down in states that may have low incidence is security itself?
Yes, but we need to admit and take into cognizance the fact that part of the reason why terrorism, reached the stage it's reached today is because of the weakness in governance. So even if you announce or pronounce a lockdown in a state like Borno State, it's nearly impossible to enforce it, just like it's impossible to enforce it in Lagos. It's not that government has not pronounced it. They've pronounced it. They've even mobilized the various security agencies to enforce it. But because of the weakness in governance, the enforcement is almost impossible. We've not talked about corruption, as it were. I run a consultancy, and I'm monitoring issues around corruption where allegedly security agencies are being given some money, and they are turning the other, turning their heads and allowing people to move around for that type of compensation. So governance and the weakness of it is an issue. Pronouncements can be made, but then how do you enforce it? The second part of this is the legitimacy that I spoke about earlier on. A lot of people are questioning the legitimacy of government in stopping them from moving around from point A to point B. So how can government even enforce such a situation when advocacy to explain to people why, why we stopped you from moving, why we stopped you from praying in churches and mosques we've not seen enough advocacy. People don't believe in, completely what government is trying to do. So unless and until I spoke about the social contract at the beginning of our discussion. It's crucial to what government is doing. We handed over our rights to government so that government can protect us. Unfortunately, there are several instances, and a good example is the situation in Lagos, where gangs, the $1 million boys, Awawa, name them, have all of a sudden become active. It's an indication that social contract is no longer valid, as it were, or is becoming affected. So people have now formed themselves into self-help groups, and they're seeking to protect themselves. Now, how much of that will government be able to contain if the lockdown continues? That is a very important question that government needs to contend with at this moment in time.
I think that this is also an opportunity for us as Nigerians to come together, because one of the things that has got us where we are today is that we have sort of outsourced our responsibility as people and as government. And I don't think there can be anything else now. I hope we won't get to the stage where we become completely helpless. This might be the opportunity to actually start to put in place some of these measures. And we will talk, we will have further conversations, obviously. This was the first one, and I thank you very much for doing this test run with us. Thank you very much.